is.
Okay.
Well, welcome to the show, Adaire. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I am fascinated by this whole area of study. You are a neuro-linguistic programming and neuroplasticity licensed practitioner. Can you talk with people and share with our audience a little bit about this area? Because as far as we've come and what I've been reading, as far as we've come in understanding the body, the brain is an area that we even today don't know nearly as much as we want to know. So can you talk about this area, your area of specialization?
Yeah. So first, with the neuro-linguistic programming, I always like to let people know that it is considered a pseudoscience, but there are scientifically proven methods that have worked, that people use, or certain therapists use when they're working with their clients. But basically, to break it down, neuro is your nervous system. All right, that's your brain that sends signals through your entire body, and that's how you communicate, right? Your linguistics is your language, the way that we communicate, whether it's verbally or non-verbally. And then communication, that's how we give each other signals. That's how we tell each other what's going on in our life. So all of that really narrows down to our belief system, and then the way that we perceive the world around us and how we react to the world around us. So, and then with neuroplasticity, which is really fascinating to me, because for the longest time, we had this idea that by the time you reach a certain age, your brain is done growing and it's done changing. Well, it is done growing by a certain age, but as far as changing it, they say that your structure is done and there's nothing you can really do about it. But that's not true. You can change your brain, which is what they call rewiring. You can rewire your brain at any moment in your life when you choose to. And this is a difference between people that were told that they could never walk again versus those that did. It's how they learn this through people that had severe accidents or stroke victims. They've used their neuroplasticity to help them regain control of those certain body parts again. So it's extremely powerful to know that we have these tiny little neurons in our brain that help us, change our entire life and the way that we experience it. I also have certification in cognitive behavioral group facilitation. So it's working with groups and going through certain cognitive behavioral therapy techniques. And that really is just going back to how I feel, or this is how I think, this is how I feel, this is how I act. So it's breaking those patterns down and helping you not be so impulsive. Your cognition is the forefront of your brain. So it's your prefrontal cortex. It's the most logical part of your brain. That's where you do all your planning, your decision making. So it's really important to understand how your emotional brain affects your cognitive decisions that you make every single day. So yeah, it goes pretty deep. And then I have some studies in fundamentals of neuroscience, just so I can understand the cellular level of how the brain works, and then how we go from our brain to our mentality.
Okay, so I have so many questions because as I said before, I am so fascinated by, well, my last name is Freud. So the whole idea of,
of course,
I have always been fascinated by psychology, and you talked about cognitive behavioral psychology, right? That's sort of an area of study. I am interested in first, though, before we get to that part, I want to understand a little bit better what you were talking about as it related to rewiring the brain, and that there is this ability. Can you give an example of what that means? And is it something that we could develop as individuals? We could develop a practice for how to help rewire our brains.
So a really simple example that I think everybody can actually relate to is manifesting. So people think, oh, manifesting, you're just, saying good things to yourself all the time. But there's actually science behind that. You are telling yourself every day, you are building this new belief system in your head every day. And what happens is your brain, our brains are very just, they're programmed to scan and bring in what we already believe. So there will be many times when we have things around us that might prove that belief system wrong, but because we're not comfortable with that and our brain's not comfortable with that, we're going to ignore it. What happens when you manifest is you open a part of your brain that was shut off before. So now when opportunities come to you, it seems like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. I asked for this. Well, you did, but you also opened up your mind to ever receiving that in the first place. And if you never did that manifestation before, you would have never saw that opportunity in the past. Manifesting, doing those daily affirmations for yourself, giving yourself mood boards, all those are things that are actually rewiring your brain.
Yeah. Okay, so let me ask this question because I want to make sure I understand. So when you just said that the manifesting, because I've read a lot about manifesting, I've read about how I've had people on the show, best-selling authors who've talked about the power of vision boarding, all of that. And you just in a very short couple of minutes explained it to me in a way that I had not understood it before, which is that what's happening when you manifest is you're basically training your brain to be open and like have almost an openness to these things that it's not that they weren't maybe coming at you before the opportunities. It's that you weren't open to them.
Yeah. You didn't
So
even believe it. You didn't know it was a reality.
Yeah.
So when you create, that new reality in your head, now it's accessible to you.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between, people who are successful. And when I say successful, I'm not talking about just financially. I just mean being in a content place in their life.
Yeah.
Versus those that continue making the same patterns and the same generational patterns as their parents and grandparents and great grandparents have made. Breaking those cycles, those mental cycles, that's rewiring your brain.
Yeah.
I mean, all of it, everything you do every single day. And it takes, I believe it takes about 21 days to create a habit. That's how long it takes for a neuron to grow and it's cute. They look like trees in your head. They look like tiny little trees that branch out before they're big enough to where they can operate on their own. And then they start signaling to you without you doing the work. So it's really interesting how how that happens and how it works. It's truly amazing.
Anybody do this, but does it matter how old I am, whether I will be able to create a new habit that then allows me to basically rewire the brain? Is it age dependent, or can anybody do it?
The only reason why it may be age dependent is because the brain does deteriorate after a certain age, and it gets harder when you get older. You know how they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Yeah.
There's truth to that, just because you have so much memory bank of what you're comfortable doing. It's much harder to do it later than it is early, but it's still possible to do.
So how did you get interested in this area? Because you modeled, right? You were a model, and then you transitioned into this career where you have the Entertainment Mindframe. That's your company.
Well, first, I've always secretly been a nerd. I just never told anybody. And I always had a fascination with the mind. I was like, it's so crazy, just where your mind goes, especially just naturally. I was a creative when I was younger. So my mind would just go all these wild places. And I was like, what's going on with me? But when I got into the industry, I had a love and hate relationship with my career, because there was so much unprofessionalism that I experienced, and not just me. I mean, everybody experiences it when they're in, a world of entertainment at some sort. Whether even doing podcasts and interviews, entertainment of any sort, you just have so many personalities and so many psychological patterns that you see being projected into the work environment. And I was like, how are people like getting work done? So I would see these patterns that they weren't only causing creatives to not flourish, but it was costing companies money because teams were falling apart and projects were falling apart, or they couldn't get a project off the ground because people just couldn't agree. And so you just have so many minds with many different backgrounds, so many different traumas in one room, and it can cause so many problems. So I was like, okay, I see this and I can either run from it, which is what I was doing for a long time. I said, I don't want to be a part of this industry anymore at all. I can either run from it or I can create something that helps. So I created my company, Entertainment Mindframe, where I was solely based on bringing brain and behavioral sciences into creative workspaces and helping people get better in their business.
So can you talk a little bit about the difference between your mental health and your brain health? Because I know we've talked about the fact that before we started recording, we were talking about that those are two different things. Can you talk about how they're different and what people need to know about those differences?
Yeah, so the brain is the structural part of the brain. It's the actual physical part of the brain and the way that it is built. And it does its natural production of things, like it produces hormones, it sends signals in certain parts of your body. It's constantly working. It never turns off. Your brain never stops, ever. And it's kind of interesting because when you think about your heart, your heart is always beating. It never misses a beat. And when it does, we freak out, right? Because something might be going on. But your heart is constantly going just to keep you alive. And your brain is doing that all the time, at all moments, even when you're sleeping, even when you're subconsciously gone. And then your mind is really your sense of self. That's where your belief systems fall in. That's where your mentality falls in. That's where your perception comes in. And they affect each other. So this is why I have such a big, because I've always been interested in mental health, and I couldn't understand why it was irritating me when I heard people talk about mental health. And I said, oh, it's because there's a whole side of the brain that nobody's talking about when it comes to your mentality and your brain. So let's just say, for example, your brain, this happened during COVID and everybody experienced it to some degree. The isolation, what that did to our brain, and then having everything taken away, all of this uncertainty exacerbated fear. And fear triggers your fight, flight, or freeze hormones. And then what that does is that'll start signaling to certain parts of your brain where you're not making the most logical decisions. Okay. And if you lead with an overproduction of those certain hormones, you can have an underproduction of the other hormones, such as dopamine or oxytocin. And dopamine is a feel-good hormone, right? Those, obviously, it's dope. That's a very addicting component that you find outside of the body. So our bodies naturally produce that. And when we're not naturally producing that, that is how you can come up with depression. That's how you can have those. It literally can be an underproduction of certain hormones. It's always, oh, this is the way I feel. The way you feel is actually a symptom of what's going on in your brain. Right. So it's just this gap, and they go together. Like I said, your cognitive part of your brain is the front of your brain, and then your emotional brain is somewhere in the middle. If I had a model, I'd be able to show you, so I don't want to completely ruin it by trying to verbally describe it to you. And then you have
Right.
your reptilian brain, which is like the oldest part of our brain. That's our survival brain. That's
Yep.
the part of our brain that's like on fire when we're in fight, flight, or freeze
Yeah.
mode. So when we're leading in fear, and this is why it's so important not to be fearful. And fear is a completely normal. I tell people this all the time. Fear is normal. It's a very normal thing to feel. If you didn't feel it, something would be wrong with you. You're
Right.
supposed to feel it, and your brain is going to tell you that's what it is because it's supposed to keep you safe. That's your
Yeah.
brain's job. Your
Yeah.
brain says, okay, this is unfamiliar territory. Let's not go this route. I
Mm-hmm.
know a safer route, so let's go back this way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so fear is absolutely normal. The problem is when you mistake fear for danger.
Mm.
So, and the
Mm-hmm.
difference, and this is how you can tell what the difference is. Fear is inside of you.
Yeah.
Fear is outside of you, right? So you can actually lead fearlessly and still be aware that there's danger
Mm.
without holding yourself back, without sacrificing things that you want to do. And when this whole COVID thing hit, that is exactly why there's been a spike of numbers in mental health um, cases, really, because they've gone through the roof because
Mm-hmm.
people have had to sit with themselves in ways that they never had to before.
Yeah.
And their lives changed. They've had to go home and they had to deal with things that they weren't dealing with, such as their marriage or
Yeah.
their children, or
Mm-hmm.
they had to start putting down boundaries with their jobs that they worked at. And
Yeah.
so I think, in a sense, COVID was an awakening for people to realize we really have to take care of ourselves and
Yeah.
not just depend on our daily lifestyle to do it for us.
Yeah. Doing some of the rewiring. If we've just lived 20 plus months with
Mhm,
fear being the thing that's driving, is there
mhm.
something we can do to start rewiring? And what would that be?
On that's there. I would say, because it's so broad, because it really depends on what everybody wants. What type of life do you want to have?
Mm.
Or really, I guess the more important feel, how do you want to feel every day? How do you want to
Mm.
feel in the future?
Mhm.
Because we are in control of the way we react to things.
Mhm.
Um, but the biggest part is whenever you feel that overwhelming sense of life, which we all feel it to some degree, whether it's finances or just regular responsibilities, or your life just not being where you want it to be, because we all have this mental clock in our head of what we should be doing, where we should be.
Right.
Um, One, breathing, as corny as that sounds, breathing
Mm.
works. Breathing slows down um, your nervous system, and it helps bring you back down to grounding. And then the
Mhm.
second thing to do is to differentiate between what you can control and what you cannot control.
Mhm. Yep.
So, for instance, since most of our base is women,
Mhm.
um, if if you're in a relationship with a man or a woman, um, and you have trauma of being abused, being
Mhm.
mistreated from the
Mhm.
past. So you
Mhm.
constantly have these fears of it happening again.
Mhm.
You have to accept that whatever they do, you cannot control,
Mhm.
right? The
Mhm.
only thing you can control is how you respond
Mm.
to what they do,
Right.
right? So let's say that your spouse or your relationship is becoming toxic and you're
Mhm.
seeing it, you're experiencing it.
Mhm.
Well, we can talk about what they did all day. We can do
Yep.
that, and it'll make us feel better, but you're not taking the accountability of um, how you're responding to it,
Yeah.
because that is where you give yourself that freedom and that rewiring of how you live your life. because what you can do, the mistake that a lot of women make, women are very sacrificial. And the reason we are is because we're like super women. We can keep going. I can give you different parts of my body and still hold this whole world up. You know, we can do that, but you shouldn't do that. You should not do that. You should not compromise your mental health, you know, for the world around you. So you have to really, in order to break the anxiety, to break depression, to break, and this isn't across the board, because sometimes there are medical cases where people are born with this. Sometimes you have trauma related mental health issues. I mean, it ranges, but for the most part, when we take control of the way that we respond to the world around us all the time, in every moment, I mean, in every moment, when you're sitting at that stoplight and the light turns green and the person in front of you won't go because they're too busy looking down at their phone, that's a moment for you to take control of and say, okay, I can either instantly get frustrated, I can honk, I can lay on my horn, I can swing around them and scare them, or I can just move over and drive through. Like all of those, and what those things are doing, because you're the one that has to live with the experience. Not the other people. The other people are only experiencing you for a moment. You have to live with that experience. And what that does is you're telling your body how to be. When you experience something, it's emotional, it's hormonal, and there's a lot going on in our cells during an experience. So if you are constantly doing the same thing, well, you're just feeding into that depression even more. You're feeding into that trauma even more. You're feeding into that anxiety anymore. Or even more. So when you're in that moment, you just have to decide, like, wait, this is what I can control. This is what I can't. So let me take what I can control and just start sifting through it. And you're really telling your brain how to live your life. And then sooner or later, when those situations hit you, it won't be such a hard impact. It won't hit you that hard. It won't leave bruises this time. It'll literally roll off your back. And you'll be like, wow, I've really changed. Yeah, you've changed. It's called neuroplasticity. You changed your mind. You changed your brain.
I love, like, you need to start breathing, right? You said
Take a breath.
Taking the breath.
Make sure you're breathing.
But how do you know? You said the next thing is to determine what you can control and what you can't control. Is that literally just looking at it and saying, is that, like, how do you develop that skill, I guess, is the question, because I think that's a lot of what we as women struggle with. Is knowing, because you also said something before that I've never heard this before about women. But I know the sentiment, but you said that we're sacrificial. And that really resonated with me, because that is such a great description of what women, we sacrifice ourselves all the time for somebody else, for our children, for other people. And that's just what we do. So how do you know what you can control? How do you determine what you can control and what you can't control, knowing that our inclination as women is to sacrifice ourselves?
Right. So I think for women, that's much harder, because women have worse boundaries than everyone else does. Women have terrible boundaries. And and like I said earlier, it's just because we think we can spread ourselves this thin and still operate in the world normally. And then we have these moments and everybody says we're crazy and they wonder why. So I think, at least for me, this is what I do. And this is why a sense of self is so important. A sense of self outside of your children, outside of your business, outside of your job, your family, your husband, your wife, your mother, your father, your heritage, your religion. Your sense of self is so important, because if you don't really have that, it is hard to differentiate between what is you and what is something else, what's somebody else, because we take so much responsibility for everything failing. So you have to, and even if it's not us, we find a way to relate it to us. Well, this wouldn't happen if I would have just did this, right? But you have to really, you have to literally, sometimes you got to write it down, which people don't like doing that. But if it's that complicated to differentiate between those moments, the only thing you know you can control is what you feel. That's a really good way to initially to figure that out, is how do I know this is me and not somebody else? It's how you're feeling, even if you're completely justified for what you feel, right? Like, for example, I've had some pretty bad experiences before with people, and I was completely in the right to be mad at them for the rest of my life if I wanted to be.
Right.
But I don't like the way it makes me feel.
Yeah.
It doesn't make me a good person.
Yeah.
It makes me hateful. It makes me bitter. It makes me search, because why? My brain is wired to see the wrong in everything. So now I'm going to start searching for people like that instead of the people that are not like that. So it's just, if you're feeling something, and we feel a lot, if you feel, that's usually you. What am I feeling? This is what I'm feeling is me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I love that, because what it tells me is that we have personal agency. Like we have the ability, like this is up to us to a great degree, right? Someone's going to say something, and yes, they did, as you said, they said the words, but it's about how you can react to it. And I love what you said about, you make a decision that you don't like how it feels when you're, I don't know, marinating in it. I don't know what the best expression
Yeah,
is.
it is marinating, ruminating, marinating, thinking on it, sitting in it, all of it.
That hurts you. Can you talk a little bit about what advice you would give to women who are working in a challenging environment and have to have to operate in one of those environments?
Depending on what the issues are, I would say, because I did see a study recently that women are experiencing burnout quicker than men are in the workspace, because they're realizing that their worth is not being reciprocated. They're realizing, okay, my counterparts are getting paid more than me, and I'm offering more than they are. So I personally was like, oh, that's great. That means people are realizing, that women are more valuable than that age-old stereotype that they're just here to fill up space. Like, we actually have things to offer. So I would say, one, because I said this on another interview that I had, was boundaries. Having boundaries in the workspace, because work is not just physical labor, it's mental labor, it's emotional labor. And you have to know, because no one else is going to do it for you. Trust me. If your teammates think you can do it, they're going to be like, okay, cool, you can have it. If your boss thinks you can do it, okay, cool, I'll let you have it. You have to speak up before you get to the point of gassing out. You do.
Yeah.
And if you have to pull people aside, have talked with them and say, hey, I don't know what's going on with us. I want you to know that I appreciate you, but you can't speak to me that way next time at a meeting. Simple, that you can't let things slide. You got to have boundaries. You got to have them. So, and there's a healthy way to do it without, ruining relationship. I would just definitely say boundaries. Boundaries are a lifesaver. They really are. Because it helps us. Boundaries don't keep people out. That's not really the job. It keeps us in line too. It keeps us in our place. So we're not overdoing things that we're not supposed to be doing.
Yeah. I love that. And maybe you could just quickly describe, what does burnout feel like? Like, how do you know if you're burnt out?
Burnout when you're burnt out, when someone says I'm tired,
Yeah.
and it resonates on all levels, like it is a physical, emotional, and
Yeah.
mental exhaustion
Yeah.
all at once. That's what burnout is. It is when you say, I can't do this anymore. And usually when people get to that point, they either take off for long periods of time or they get up and quit and change careers. And rethink their whole life.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes, you know, you just have these awakenings and those are fine. But it's important to have an awakening after having boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Like, because some people have these patterns, like they have such poor boundaries, and then you look at their life patterns or life cycles, and there's no stability because their lack of boundaries causes them to go, give my all in whatever situation I'm in. And then now I'm tired and I can't deal with it anymore. So I'm going to give up and I'm going to go to the next project.
Yeah.
That's not good for you. And that's why that sense of self I was talking about, that's why that's so important in saying, okay, this is who I am and this is what I need.
Yes.
Period.
Yes.
Period. This is what I am, this is what I need. And I cannot sacrifice anything else, or you're not going to like me, or I'm not going to be good for this company.
Yeah.
You know? So
yes.
Right along the lines of what you're saying, with any woman that's dealing with it, or really any person, but anybody that's dealing with this, is that when you start feeling that burnout, it is so good to do that evaluation and see, okay, is this something I can change and give myself to where I can keep going? Where can I get my fuel from? Where can I get my motivation from, my inspiration from? And if there's nothing you can find around you or in you that's going to propel you forward, then maybe you need to rethink where you are.
Yes. So this is what we hear over and over and over again from women. They understand something doesn't feel right. Something's not sitting right, but they can't pinpoint what it is.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for how women can work to build? It almost feels like you need to build a practice, but maybe it's something else. What are your thoughts?
I think it's about unfolding who you are. So when I talk about self-awareness, or sense of self, because self-awareness is your sense, is understanding that sense of self. Your sense of self is your essence. That is, it's what you are. If you were nothing but a vapor, that's what your essence is. It is not anything you can see. It's not your children. It's not your animals. It's not the cars you have. It's not the friends you have. It is you. It's if you were a vapor and you took that little bitty piece of vapor and trapped it and put it in something else, what would that be?
Right.
Right. And then your self-awareness is understanding what that is.
Yeah.
And everything that you have to build around that in your life, that's going to support that essence of what you are. So I always tell people, you know, because so many people are like, I have to heal. And I'm like, don't use that word. Don't use healing. Say that you're unfolding.
Yes.
You know, say that you're getting rid of these belief systems that you've told yourself, that other people have told you, or these ideas of this life that you should be having, or the money you should be making. Like, peel that shit off of you.
Yeah.
Peel it off until you have nothing. And when you're left with nothing, that's what your sense of self is.
Yeah.
Right. And that doesn't change. So whatever makes you happy, whether it's listening to music or just sitting in the shower longer than everybody else does, or, you know, taking a drive if you feel like it, or going to get your nails done, or, you know, going to get a massage, whatever it is that you like to do, anything.
Yep.
Oh, you know, I always tell women to just like unfold who you are, and, you know, separate yourself from all the things you are, because your titles are nothing but it's just a resume.
Yeah.
You know,
Adaire, I could keep talking to you, as you can tell. I am so fascinated by what you do, and just I think that people are going to get so much good information from this conversation, from your insights.
Mhm.
I really appreciate you spending this time with us. How can people follow you, follow what you do if they want to learn more? What's the best way for them to do that?
I'm pretty active on my Instagram. So if you type in my name, Adaire, last name Byerly, that's Adaire Byerly, you should see two different pages pop up. Actually, I have my creative page, and then I have my Brains Behind Fame, which is more my business page. And you can also type my name in the search engine. You'll see LinkedIn pop up, Facebook. You could add me on there. And then you can also subscribe to my website, where we send out newsletters and things that we'll be doing in the future, events and stuff regarding mental health based events. So, and that's at www.entertainmentmindframe.com.
That is awesome. Well, I'm definitely going to subscribe, and I will make sure that we have all of the links for people. Adaire, thank you for spending this time with us today and for helping enlighten us on a
Thank
topic
you.
that I think is so important. And you talk about it so eloquently. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I love doing it. So I'm happy to help.